This episode originally aired in July 2019 on the since-retired Pertinent Information Podcast. In this episode, Josh and I talk about the current state of the two-party political system in the United States. We go into how we got here, and do third-party candidates ever have a shot of being elected to significant political positions? Right around when this episode originally aired, Justin Amash, who was originally a Republican, became an independent, and in April 2020 joined the Libertarian Party. Amash has served as a United States representative for Michigan's 3rd congressional district since 2011. In 2020, he started a campaign to run for president as a Libertarian. However, he abandoned his campaign just a month in. On Twitter, Amash commented on the current state of our two-party political system, saying, "Electoral success requires an audience willing to consider alternatives, but both social media and traditional media are dominated by voices strongly averse to the political risk posed by a viable third-party candidate. The new reality of social distancing levels the playing field among the candidates in many respects, but it also means lesser-known candidates are more dependent on adequate media opportunities to reach people." Enjoy this conversation on the issues of our current two-party political system. All right, so I'm here with Josh.
Yeah, what's up?
How are you?
Good.
Awesome. So, your buddy Ross Perot.
I don't know much about him actually. Like I know his story, but like politically, I don't really even know what he stood for. I remember when I was a kid though in '92, my dad sitting on the couch watching him at the presidential debates, saying that he really liked him. You know, I was pretty young and a kid, but
You remember that?
yeah, I do remember that.
That's crazy. That's cool. So, your buddy Ross Perot died. So rest in peace, Ross.
Yeah.
So that got us thinking, and this is definitely a topic that you and I have talked about in the past, and that's kind of the currently the climate in the United States is we essentially have two political parties that rule all.
Right.
And so this topic came to mind to talk about because Ross Perot was in the relative history one of the most popular third party candidates or politicians. So I thought it'd be a little interesting to kind of pull some info about just third party representation in the US. And obviously it's been pretty rare. So outside of the major 6 parties. So now there's been 2 parties for the last however, many years, but for the entire history, there's been essentially 6 main parties, and that's the Federalist Party, the Democratic-Republican Party,
The Anti-Federalists.
Okay. The National Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Whig Party, and then the Republican Party. So those 6 throughout history have been the popular parties, and then essentially all of them except for obviously the Republican and the Democratic Party have been kind of pushed down or had their time in the sun. Let's see. Okay, so the last time that a third party has kind of taken out essentially a major party was in 1856. So it's been a minute.
Right.
And that was when the Republicans took out the Whigs, which that party basically withered away.
And who was running over that time period?
Yeah, so when was that? What did we say?
56, right before Lincoln was elected. And what's interesting is that our system historically was not meant to have parties, but structurally speaking, that's how our elections are set up.
Yeah.
Like our elections are designed to have 2 parties, even though like constitutionally speaking, that's not the way it was meant to be. Thomas Jefferson was anti-party altogether, even though he ended up leading the Democratic Republican Party against Alexander Hamilton, who was the Federalist Party. He's the one that created and kind of led that. So
1856, James Buchanan was a Democrat and won. John C. Fremont was a Republican, and he came in second. Millard Fillmore was the American Party, which essentially was the Whig Party. The main guy before that was Winfield. Winfield Scott from the Whig Party, who in the election before 1852 lost out to Franklin Pierce of the Democratic Party. So
it's interesting that you already see, though, you don't see incumbents winning year after year like you do now.
You do. I feel like early on, I mean, and then you get into Abraham Lincoln, Grant. So like right around that mid to late 1800s, I think you see that. But even before, you've got, you've got the Monroes, James Monroe, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, all going or winning back to back. Not John Adams, but George Washington then.
Yeah. Right.
So, and so there's been 58 elections since 1788. The third party or independent candidates have won at least 5% of the vote or garnered electoral votes just 12 times. So 5% of the vote.
Yeah.
12 times. And this does not count George Washington, who was elected as an independent, but they barely had parties back then.
Yeah.
The first election, and he was largely Federalist.
And he was anti-party too. In his farewell address, he's quoted warning about the parties. He acknowledged that parties have to exist, but he really warned the public about the demonization of parties and how they become like these political factions that we really need to be careful about, which I thought was interesting considering he was very federalist. He was very centralized government, which even in his day was very anti the way the system was originally set up. That we think back to the Declaration of Independence. Well, that was very sovereign, like individual rights, and that was very against a centralized government.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So if we look back to the last third-party candidate to win a state, do you have any idea?
No, I don't.
George Wallace of the American Independent Party.
I've never even heard of that party.
In 1968. It actually wasn't that long ago.
That's not that long ago at all.
No.
Oh, but he won a state.
But he just won a state.
Which state did he win? Did it say?
I don't remember. That one wasn't important, apparently,
yeah.
to Wikipedia.
Right,
I didn't look it up. So then the last third-party candidate to win more than 5% of the vote was your boy Ross Perot, who ran as an independent and then as a Reform Party in 92 and 96, respectively. So then, since that, most recently then, and I think we'll all remember Gary Johnson in 2016, who got 3.3%.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Killed
my soul.
As a libertarian, and we'll get into that, I think, and you're kind of that, I don't know how deep we want to go into that, but I mean, you have quite a bit of experience as far as third party versus Republican versus libertarian and things. But so most recent third party candidate to receive an electoral vote was Ron Paul. And
was that 2012?
I think so.
Yeah.
And then an independent from Yankton Sioux Nation. Faith Spotted Eagle got an electoral vote from a faithless elector in 2016.
Interesting.
Which was odd because I don't remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
You'd think that would make news out of 2016, but I guess Trump winning.
Yeah, I think the polls being turned on their heads took precedence over pretty much anything else.
Which, wow. And then if you guys don't know what a faithless elector is, it's just somebody who is an electoral college voter who, where they are told to vote by what their state votes, but they vote for someone else. So that person voted for herself. So
all right then.
Good job, Faith. So, dude, why are we at where we're at?
Yeah,
how did we get there? I mean, so we're in a dominant. Obviously, the past 30 plus years has been heavily Republican, Democrat, back and forth between incumbents and electors. Like, how did we get that way? Why? When you look early on, you see quite a few people running. It's not just one versus the other,
right?
So why are we here?
So it started a lot, like I kind of mentioned before, like the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist parties. And the Anti-Federalist is the Democratic Republican Party, and they resisted that label for actually quite a few years because they didn't, like Thomas Jefferson didn't want to be associated with a party. But it became pretty clear and evident when we were drafting the Constitution that there was a group of people that wanted a centralized government, and then you had guys like Thomas Jefferson saying no, we don't want a centralized government, and he was very advocating against that principle. And so through that, you see these group of people kind of align with this idea of a centralized government, and they created themselves a Federalist Party. And then you basically got everybody else who's saying we don't really want that. And they had all different sorts of beliefs, which is why they didn't want to align themselves as a party, because that's the definition of a party is aligning yourself around the principles of a thing, right?
Right.
And the Federalists just happened to align that the central government and everything that comes with the central government gave them that ideology to align about.
Sure.
So that's really how the power formed. And when the Federalists won and we drafted the actual Constitution and we created a centralized government, then it was just kind of a back and forth from there of groups of people aligning with, one person or the other person. And that political divide has existed ever since then.
Yeah. So has the Electoral College then and that type of voting system, has that just enabled this, do you think?
Inherently, yeah.
I don't think that, and I could be completely wrong, but it doesn't seem like it was meant to.
Right.
Right? It wasn't meant to create this duopoly.
Right.
But for some reason it has. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds about should or shouldn't we have an electoral college. But how do we go away from it then? And I think there's a bunch of different, and I guess before we go into other voting systems, I think it's really interesting. The count, so the number of registered voters by party.
Yeah.
So this is really, really interesting to me because I didn't expect this. So essentially, and I'm just gonna round up and down for a number's sake here, but basically 40% of the registered voters are Democrats. 30% are Republicans.
Really?
And 28% are independents. We have a lot of independents.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked about this even in our state, because we've been watching the LP numbers, which are non-existent. But there's a lot of independents.
Right.
So why haven't we elected an independent at all? Anywhere. I mean, there are some independents in the House and Senate. Not very many, though. Not what you would see representative roughly 30%.
Right. And so that's the topic. Like that's the key point as to why a third party can't win, whether it's an independent, a libertarian, a constitutionalist, like whatever it is because people have fallen into the faction of the two parties, and we have this gross misrepresentation in not only the way that we elect people, but just the misrepresentations in our like U.S. Congress.
Right.
The House of Representatives, they capped it at whatever the representation is. It's like one electorate for every 75,000 people. It was supposed to be like one for every 14,000. Like we should have 10,000 House of Representatives or something like that in Congress. Yeah. If we were to stick to the original constitutional design for representation.
Yeah.
And if we had that level of representation, we wouldn't have the same level of party politics that we do today.
Yeah. But what's crazy to me is that roughly 1 out of every 3 people is an independent. Not 1 out of every 3 elected officials an independent.
No. And that goes back to Plato actually talked about this, like way, way, way back when.
We're going deep.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what he was quoted saying, but he talked a lot about how people get into herd mentalities and they follow their groups against what's good for their families, what's good for their people around them, what's good for their own communities, and they will align with whatever party that they belong to. So way back in those days, they still had political parties, although they weren't really derived around ideologies, they were derived around class. Sure. So you had the elite class representing one group, and then you had basically the common people representing the other group. So if you were a common person, you voted for that person regardless of their principles or policies, because that's the only choice that you had. And that mentality has just been driven into our generation. I mean, going way back into the Federalist.
So I'm going to ask this question. I don't know if you have an answer or not, or if you care. What role does the media have in that in the duopoly?
That goes back to money. right? Like, I mean, the media is controlled by money. I mean, whatever's going to get the most clicks, and which I don't know if I can say that though, because I mean, a libertarian candidate or a third party candidate getting a lot of PR and publicity is going to get a lot of clicks, right?
I mean, Gary Johnson got a ton of press.
He did.
A lot of press.
And a lot of it was free and unpaid for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
a lot of it was him saying dumb stuff.
What is Aleppo?
Or weird stuff.
Poor guy.
And he was one that was advocating marijuana, decriminalization on a federal level and things. And so he got a lot of press because of that. But that's good.
Right.
That's what we wanted. That's what we need. But he got 3% of the vote.
Yep.
He got crushed.
And that comes from going back to the voting system. We have and I struggle with this concept of spoiler candidates, right? If you vote for the third candidate, you're throwing away your vote, or you're giving it to the person that you like least. And so it's that idea when you have 30% or 40% Republicans, or let's go 35% Republicans, 35% Democrats, and you've got this middle. Well, if they all vote for the third party, not all of them is going to vote for the third party, but essentially, if you vote for the third party who leads more conservative, you're pulling votes from the conservative candidate, and then the progressive wins. And that's sort of what that's the spoiler, right? That happens, and that's where you saw Ross Perot too. A lot of people argue if Perot didn't run, Clinton wouldn't have won the election, and so they called him the spoiler. And he wasn't even a party candidate. Like, he was just a third party in the election, and he spoiled everything for the conservative vote.
Yeah. So when you look at essentially Dems, Republicans, Independents, for simplicity's sake, they all have about a 33%. So they're all virtually even. Dems have a little more. But then when you look at third party candidates, there are 3 top third party candidates, and I can say top in quotes because they're virtually there's no representation to them, and they have zero voice. And so the top third party is the Libertarians. Do you want to take a stab at how many registered Libertarians in the country there are? You might have actually a pretty good guess.
I'm gonna say it's probably just under 600,000.
So I think so. So the number I had was 511, but I think that was 2017 or 2018.
Yeah.
So, but that's 0.5%
Yeah, it's weak.
of the total vote.
It's weak, and we're scared of it.
Like, what do you mean?
We're scared of, well, because then we can't vote in the primaries.
Yeah.
If you're a Republican, which a lot of Republicans are realistically libertarians on many issues.
100%.
They don't want to lose not being able to vote in their primary.
I'm that guy. I think.
And I kind of don't blame you. And that becomes the issues of, like, why do we have primaries?
Or even as an independent. I mean, I don't know that, and I haven't looked into this a whole lot. I don't know that the independent isn't a party, is it? I guess technically kind of is, but it doesn't have its, like, central, like, this is what independents believe. Right? It's just kind of like the leftovers.
Right.
It's like, I don't want to be a Democrat. I don't want to be a Republican. I can't be a Libertarian because they're crazy. I can't be a Green Party because that sounds weird. Like, I'm just going to be an independent because I think the name too, especially with like millennials and Gen Z's, like, I'm an independent person. I'm going to be an independent. So I think that's why the numbers have gone up, right? I think a little bit.
And they'll say I'm going to be an independent, and they will inherently vote for a Democrat or Republican in the election.
Yep. Well, obviously for how everybody's, so
which is the sick part. Like,
so the Green Party, which is, I went on their website and it looks kiddish.
Yeah. Yep.
It's like the fonts they use in their logo is a joke. They've got 250,000 members ish. So that's 0.2% of the total.
I'm surprised it's that high.
Yeah.
I mean, that's staunch competition for the LP.
It really is.
if you think about it.
And then the Constitution Party has just around 100,000.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's just another huge drop off.
Right.
So after independence, there's a huge drop off to the third parties. And then there's a huge drop off after the top 3. So you can essentially call them the fourth party. And I mean, there are quite a few actual recognized parties.
Yeah, so I think there's over a dozen.
Yeah. So that's where you get 2%, 2.4-ish% are considered third party or others. So that's about 2.6 million people.
Yeah.
It's not nobody. So what's those? What do you think? So, what is your opinion? So, should these libertarians, should these green parties, should they just say, all right, and I know the answer to this, but I'm just going to be a Republican. I'm just going to be a Democrat. I'm just going to be an independent, and we're going to fight where we can fight? Or do they try to grow their parties? Do they try to say, hey, guys, this is ridiculous, even though in their lifetime, in our lifetime, they will never see a libertarian president?
I struggle with this answer. Like you said, you know the answer, but or you know what I'm going to respond.
As a libertarians, most of the libertarians are like, hell no, I'm going to fight till I die to be a libertarian, which I can't say is wrong.
Right.
But I also can't say that like they have zero influence in our election.
and it's gotten worse after 2016. Like 2011, we saw the influx. Or not 2011, excuse me, 2012, we saw the influx of the libertarian movement really start to take hold. Gary Johnson was a candidate for the Libertarian Party in 2012, and so a lot of people were like, hey, what's this, and so that caught hold. Then you had Ron Paul, who was running for the Republican Party, and he garnered a bunch of votes. He didn't win the whatever they call it, the primary. So he wasn't the nominated candidate, but a lot of people were liking his ideas. He was anti-war. He was, pro-liberty. He was pro-economics. Like all of these things were really great. And then 2016 happened, and then we really saw the wave because we had Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and people are like, well, this is the worst thing ever. But it was still so fascinating. Like I really thought Gary Johnson was going to get 10+% of the vote. I really did. I truly did. And when he didn't even get 5%, it was like kind of a blow.
It would have been... and I hate to use the term moral victory, but if that guy would have got 10%, that would have been a moral victory for the LP.
Yep. And that's really what they were going for.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I don't think anybody really believed at heart it was going to happen.
No.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
You had guys like me saying, oh, it's possible, but I knew better. But to get to that 10%, but kind of going back to your question, like, so what do we do? Do we just subscribe to, the two current parties? I don't think that's necessarily the way it should work. I think you have the people that fight till they die and grow their party and whatever else. And I think that's great, and they should do that. But if they want to see actionable change, they need to take their libertarian style candidates and run them as Republicans or run them as Democrats where they can get elected. Registered.
Okay.
Like... And this is what I believe should happen. And it should be up to the individual choice. But
so then you are saying to conform to Republicans because they have to change from a registered libertarian to a registered Republican.
But party-wise, that shouldn't happen. Like the Libertarian Party shouldn't just be like, oh, we're just going to go be Republicans now. I think it's a very strategic movement of saying, hey, this is a real candidate that can garner enough support in their district, and it really. And the Libertarian Party has been trying this more and more now, is going to local politics. Like, let's get libertarians elected in their city governments. Let's get them elected as mayors. I think. Let's get them elected in their state houses and state senates and things like that. But it's not working, is the problem.
Do you off the top of your head know how many elected libertarians there are?
It's a handful. I don't know what that number is.
So I can Google it real quick. But yeah, I think it's a good long-term strategy.
And this is why in our lifetime we will never see.
I think just the way the numbers roll out, I think we could see an independent.
I agree with that. I do. And that goes back to Ross Perot. I mentioned off of this before we got started. Ross Perot's got a really interesting story about how he garnered the support that he did. So in early, it was February of 1992. A lot of people were, asked him, are you going to run? He was kind of into politics at the time. He was making some statements. So he was on Larry King that night. And he says, yeah, I'm not going to run it under a party. I'm going to run as an independent because I will never, the only thing I'm going to sell out to is the American people. I'm not going to sell out to a party. I'm not going to subscribe to party politics. So he said to them, on Larry King Live, to the public, he said, if you get me on the ballot in all 50 states, I will run. And the phones blew up. He had set up a 1-800 number for people to call in and say, I want to help. I want to volunteer. And at the time, the internet didn't exist in broad sense. You know, there was 50 servers that existed worldwide when he made this announcement. So even for him to set up a 1-800 number was a big deal, but it crashed the calls.
It's crazy.
I mean, it was tens of thousands of calls coming in every hour in support of getting this guy on the ballot. And you saw this widespread movement go across the country that was completely grassroots. It was completely unorganized. It had this crazy notion that this guy can get elected as an independent without having a party leader, without having party ideals, anything like that. So they're all volunteers. And that's what I think is really fascinating, because I don't even think it matters what his politics were, just the fact that he was willing to challenge the system, and that's what people went by. And I thought that was a pretty cool facet of what he did.
Yeah. Do you think he had a shot, though? First of all, that's an amazing way to get your name out there.
Yeah.
But also, the guy's a billionaire.
Yeah.
I didn't hurt.
And
so he was able to raise a lot of his own money, I'm assuming.
He self-funded most of his campaign.
Or he knew rich dudes that maybe helped him out.
Yep.
Even though they were, helping other parties or other candidates. I don't know. But
during his campaign, which was a non-campaign, which is ultimately why he quit the race. So he dropped out halfway through in 92.
Yep.
And that kind of, when I was first reading about his story, I was like, wow, this guy's amazing. Then he dropped out. And I was like, why'd you drop out, man? Yeah. And there was a lot of reasons why he dropped out, but mostly because he couldn't stomach the politics of it. He didn't want to go with the tradition. And everybody that was trying to get him elected was like, you need to start utilizing traditional tactics. You need to have like a political ideology that people can get behind. Like, people like you and they like the things that you're saying, but we need to define your economic policy. And he didn't want to do it. And that's ultimately why he quit the race. Among other things, he was getting death threats. He was getting a lot of stuff.
That's great. I get it. I mean, I don't get it, but it doesn't surprise me.
Right. And ultimately that's why he quit. And then even more surprising, so at the time when he quit, he was on the ballot in 24 states. He was registered at the time that he quit. And his movement kept going without him. He publicly said, I am not going to run in this race anymore. And his his volunteer base got him on the other 26 states.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And so he came back for the debates.
Oh, he did.
He did. He came back in October, and he did the debates, the presidential debates. The first time that we've seen televised third party debates.
Yeah. Because was Gary Johnson on?
He was not.
Any debates?
He was not in any presidential debates.
Wow.
And then people are just like, well, why not? You know, I mean, that's the easy question. And back when Ross Perot ran, I don't think either of the two parties recognized that he was a viable candidate.
Yeah.
And the idea of creating rules around having a third party didn't exist, because we saw on your spreadsheet that there was a lot of candidates all the time, and they had presidential debates all the time with all of those candidates. It always happened. And then it just drastically dropped off when we got to, I don't know, whatever years that we just saw the two primary candidates that were running. And so there was no policies. But after Ross Perot, the Presidential Debate Committee created policies to create barriers to have a third-party candidate. And that's why we never saw another one again since Ross Perot.
Yeah, in 48, there was a progressive and a Dixiecrat, or a states' rights Democrat, apparently. Strom Thurmond. I know the name.
Huh.
Henry Wallace was a progressive. That was in 1948. That was the last time outside of...
So ever since then, we've seen basically two people running in our presidential election.
It's crazy.
So for 70 years.
Well, and then look, even before that, that was almost an anomaly.
Right.
So then we had Norman Thomas was a socialist in 32, and he ran. A progressive ran in 24. A socialist ran in 20. A socialist ran in 12. And 16. So, I mean, really, in 08. So, I mean, when was the last time we had more than three? Yeah, 1872. We had 3 Democrats, a Republican, an independent Democrat, and a Democrat liberal Republican, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But that was, what, six people.
Yeah.
And so the last time we had more than 3 people on a ticket or card was 1872. So going back to the LP, I don't know how many elected officials they have. I'm on the LP website, and it looks like they've got 188 contacts when they list out that they're elected officials. So I'm going to assume they have 188 elected officials.
So when I said a handful, I really meant a
handful. That is literally a handful, because then my next question is, well, how many elected officials are there?
Right.
600,000.
Yeah.
188
in 600,000
out of 600,000 elected officials in the United States. Goodness. And we're talking city councils.
Yeah.
We're not just talking Senate, House, governor. We're getting into the weeds. Mayor. We're talking mayors. We're talking city councils. We're talking district Senate. I mean,
that's
House.
rough.
Yeah.
In South Dakota here, we did just get a Libertarian mayor elected out in, well, I can't remember what town. It's out by Rapid City, though. It's West River. It's in District 30.
Interesting.
So that's a win for the LP, I guess.
I just really feel in South Dakota, like in these red states, is where these LPs should hit it hard. And maybe they are. I don't know much about their strategy as far as getting more registered LPs, but you got to think, because they skew more conservative in their viewpoints. They're not Democrats.
Right.
Or liberal leaning. So I feel like they should hit these red states really hard and try to get some people over to the Libertarian Party.
And realistically, South Dakota should be a prime state for that, because of the fact that we have low voter turnout, we have low registered voters, which means that there's a prime opportunity there for them to attack that state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't. Lance something is his name.
I'm trying to pull it up.
I can't remember.
I don't see it. Lance Russell.
Yes. Yep, that was him. So he's a Libertarian.
He says he's registered Republican.
Well.
So
that'd be, I guess, how he got elected. The LP, the South Dakota LP, was excited about Lance Russell. Cool. So, maybe he changed his party registration right after he got elected or right before he got elected, one of the two, which is another it's honestly a viable strategy, is to get Republicans elected and then have them switch their party affiliation right after election.
Dude makes $11,000 a session. Just rolling in it. No, that's...
Yeah, registered
Republican. Oh, he ran against Gideon Oaks. I remember that name. Gideon was a registered Libertarian.
He's the state chair. Now, currently. He's the new Libertarian Party state chair. But I think I was talking about mayor. The mayor of whatever this town is in here.
Hot Springs. Because district or Custer. Anyway, whatever. So here's the $1 million question, or billion or $1 trillion question is, how do we break this cycle? One of the ideas that has been thrown around locally, it's been thrown around in our local elections, since we just had a mayor and we had 29 people running for mayor, and you know what I mean, and they had to do a runoff and all that stuff. It's just choice voting. So the more popular is the ranked choice voting. Also
can be known as instant runoffs.
Yes. So I'm going to read what I read out of. This is from Ballotpedia, which is interesting for political election stuff. But a ranked choice voting system is an electoral system in which voters rank candidates by preference on their ballots. So let's stop there. If there are 3 candidates, you rank this guy's number 1, this gal's number 2, this gal's number 3.
Yep.
So number 1 means top.
First choice, second choice, third choice. So then if a candidate wins a majority of the first preference votes, he or she is declared the winner. So if somebody wins by a majority or gets the majority, they win. But if no candidate wins a majority of first preference votes, the candidate with the fewest first preference vote is eliminated. So the person who comes in third is done, is basically just taken out. And then the first preference votes cast for the failed candidate are eliminated, lifting the second preference choices
indicated on those ballots. A new tally is conducted to determine whether any candidate has won a majority of the adjusted votes. The process is repeated until a candidate wins an outright majority. The system is sometimes referred to as an instant runoff voting system. It sounds insanely complicated. I think what voters need to know is you just rank the candidates.
Yeah.
You still pick a winner. You still pick your favorite, but you have to pick a second favorite.
Right.
And a third favorite and a fourth and a fifth. And I suppose you don't have to.
Nope, you don't.
So if you are just like, hey, I hate Hillary Clinton, I'm only going to vote for Donald Trump, because there's a lot of people in South Dakota that say that, you can just put a number 1 for Donald Trump. You don't have to put a 2.
Right. What you can't do is you can't put a 1, 2, and 3 next to Donald Trump.
What about okay, true. So what if there's multiple? Could you put a 5 next to Hillary? Because it wouldn't matter.
It wouldn't matter.
So anyway, this is what people are saying could help this duopoly or break out of the political party. So what's your thought on the ranked choice?
So to everybody that listened to that description, you're probably like, what?
Yeah.
Because immediately it's like, you need a visual, you need a graphic representation of how it really works. And even then, when it comes down to counting, like the redistribution of votes, like when you take out the last candidate and say this is no longer a viable candidate, so then you redistribute the votes to the next choice of that ballot, there's like 30 different ways that can happen. There's a tons of different ways to set that up and how you do it. And that's where it becomes extremely complex. And then you get into these percentages and all these other stuff that even the voting officials get confused by. Yeah. And this is where the big con of ranked choice voting comes in, is if you can't explain it to an 80-year-old, you don't have an effective voting system.
Yeah.
And they're not wrong when they say that. I mean, we have a hard enough time explaining our electoral college to young kids in school. But when you get down to the basics of, just rank your people, rank the person that you want to vote for, the people that you want to vote for, it really opens the door to mass representation, where your third-party candidate now can get enough votes to break a threshold. Especially this is appealing when you have multi-seat races. So if you've got 2 people running for your district house and there's 5 candidates, the 2 people that are going to be elected might not be the popular vote people. So your third-party candidate might be able to sneak into one of those seats because of the way the votes are distributed. And that's really where it comes into popular play. So ranked choice voting might not be great for a presidential election, at least not now. But if you're looking at city councils where you have 8 seats available, ranked choice voting is really, really clear, a really, really clear way to get representation onto the panel of votes.
Yeah. I think it makes sense to me. Here's why I don't think it'll happen in our lifetime is because they can't explain it, to your point.
So when you say it can't happen in our lifetime, like for local elections?
Yeah.
Because this exists all over the country. So it exists in city councils. It exists in...
so I don't think I think the big... The struggle is obviously explaining it, and I think the minute you get somebody up there who's just like, well, everybody, this is how this works, and this is how their votes are tallied, and this and that, and people gloss over, and they're gonna listen, I don't trust the government anyway. This number jockey up here telling me how this is gonna work, I don't trust this guy because I don't understand him. That's the big hurdle,
right?
It's not a great excuse, I don't think. I mean, just because you can't understand it doesn't mean it's not viable. But,
right.
Because I mean, we talked about it, like I said, on the local level, in our mayoral elections. So I think that's an option, but I still don't think it matters if we have Democrats and Republicans and independents. So what are your thoughts about eliminating parties?
That would be the dream to me, and I think the problem with eliminating one party. I mean, we've seen the factions of the Democratic Party and the factions of the Republican Party divided now more than ever, which is historically how all these different parties that we look at in the past, that's how they get taken apart. As they create factions, you get too many chiefs in the kitchen, you get this division of leadership that ultimately just falls apart. But inherently, someone else comes up and say, I've got political ideas, align behind me.
Yeah.
And then you just replace it with another party. And I don't know that that's going to go away ever. And with our current voting system, we will continue to be stuck in the first past the post, the winner takes all style voting in our local elections and our state elections. And if we can't get third party or independent candidates elected on a local level in our state legislation, we're never going to see representation happen in U.S. Congress either. Because that's really where it happens. Yeah. You know, if all we have are Republican Democrats in every state, then they're only going to elect Democrats and Republicans in their U.S. Congress, you know, in the U.S. Senate and U.S. House. So as great as it would be to take down the parties, I really think that ranked choice voting is a grassroots effort that can happen. Like we just start doing it in city councils, people get used to it. Then we start doing it in district settings where we're electing our state officials through ranked choice voting. And then from there, we can start to make better decisions. We can see how it works. We can see how we can tweak the system. We can start to take on corruption this way. So I do think that's the ultimate goal. But we also need to start realizing, like the independents are, that we don't need to fall behind a group of people all the time. We can fall behind one ideal and agree with them and then disagree with them on the other ideal. And that's where I think the Libertarian Party can have an advantage to elect Republican libertarians and just say, look, just because you're a Republican doesn't mean that you have to be a Republican.
Right. Or vote.
Or that's what I mean. Like, and that's the big challenge that I think we have is we don't have enough people who become Republicans and then don't vote Republican.
So what do you think about, because there's usually, South Dakota, our state, is a very Republican, even though there's a lot of registered Dems and independents in South Dakota, but there's always something that comes up where they want to hide party affiliation on the ballot.
Right.
What do you think about that?
I don't know, man. I see the draw for it. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. I really don't. I haven't really thought much about what that would look like specifically. I don't think it garnered enough support to even be considered viable.
Yeah, not a chance in South Dakota. I just saw that there's only 2 currently elected independents in the Senate.
Yeah, when you said that, I was going to ask. I was like, really? Is one of them Justin Amash? Because he would technically be number 3.
And so, he's King of Maine and Bernie Sanders of Vermont.
Is an independent? Interesting.
So
you've got Justin Amash. Do you know who that is at all, or paid attention? He's a senator out of. You look him up, Justin Amash. He's an elected senator house. Either way, he just left the Republican Party. Justin Amash. He just left the Republican Party on July 4th, claiming his own independence. He had a great speech about it.
Oh, geez.
We don't need to get rid of political parties. We need them more. NBC News. That's their headline 1 hour ago.
U.S. Rep in Michigan.
Michigan. There we go. So he's in the House. He is the best libertarian style person in Congress. Like,
he's a young dude though. He's 39. So I think, and this is kind of my last point is I think as we get younger people elected, or not even elected, but just interested in voting. Yeah. Because let's be honest, I wasn't interested in voting until I became an adult in my mind, in a way, about, I've got a house, I've got kids, I've got to think about taxes, I've got to think about my income, I've got to think about my kids and their future and all this. And then you just think, and you're like, oh my gosh, I should probably look into some of this stuff.
Right.
So I don't think people care when they're 20.
Right. Do you think that's changing though?
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
I really do, because I feel like the millennials and the Gen Zs, they're getting more active. Because look, when we were kids, our option for political whatever, it was ABC, NBC, CBS.
Yeah.
The TV.
Yeah.
Now
because again, like, internet wasn't a thing to spread these ideas.
No. And so now all these kids are being bombarded with, just online social media, and they have the ability, and I really do feel like they kind of grow up a little faster in a way. And so I think that as we continue to see independents grow, the Democrats decrease.
Yep.
I think it'll be interesting in our lifetime. It's gonna be different than it is in 2019.
Yeah.
But we just got to get because I feel like these old people, like the Bernie Sanders,
the
and
establishment,
the establishment, they got to go.
Yeah.
And term limits. What do you think? I just thought of this.
Oh, term limits?
Yeah.
You want me to go in on term limits?
I want you to give a quick brief.
So, unpopular position, I am against term limits.
So you think people should be able to run and be elected forever?
Yes, and that's a hard position to take because I see the draw for term limits. Like I understand the position, and I don't necessarily think that's wrong.
Yep.
But by and large, we have term limits every time we vote.
Technically, yes.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
So when we get someone like Justin Amash who believes in liberty, who believes in, he's a constitutionalist, he's an anti-federalist. He's the thing that, for me and my political beliefs, I align with him a lot. Mm-hmm. For him to just be termed out after 8 years, after he's built, or 12 years, or whatever the term limits be, after he's built the relationships that he needs to do to actually create good policy and start to have the conversations that he needs in Congress to get something done, then he just gets kicked out because he's been there too long.
Yep. So I agree with a caveat.
Yeah.
I think we need to figure out this duopoly crap first, then get rid of term limits. Once we see some different parties being elected, I'm fine then. I just think it's ridiculous now how we elect people and how and especially in this last election, how Hillary Clinton, she was deserved. It was her time. Yep. She deserved it to be the presidential candidate. Like, really? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I think it is changing as we get these establishment people out. We get some people that are going to be more creative with how they're going to run local, state, regional government. It's going to change.
And Justin Amash is paving that way.
Yeah, agreed.
He left the Republican Party after he constantly votes against the Republicans when he needs to.
So he's a registered independent?
Now he is, yeah. Yep. So and well, it might not have taken effect yet because this is literally July 4th that he did this. That's when he made his speech.
Well, how does that work if you're an elected official and you change party affiliations?
Yeah, you can do it. There's nothing that says that you can't.
And again,
it's interesting because you kind of like
that goes to you elect. Did they elect the person or did they elect their party?
Yep. So he is going to be running for his seat as an independent
when he comes up in
2020,
for the Congress of Michigan, or is he running for something else?
Well, yeah, for U.S. Congress.
Sure.
Whenever his election is, he's running as an independent, and so Tulsi Gabbard, the Democratic, one of the Democratic Party, whatever candidates, she was on Joe Rogan podcast, and she was talking about how when she was elected as a Democrat, the first day that you go to Congress and you sit there, they have like an orientation for all the newcomers. And she said that you sit there and you go through, this is the do's, this is the don't. Here's the cafeteria. Here's where you go do this. Here's the tour and everything. I said, okay, now you're done. Democrats, when you exit, you'll go out to the left. And Republicans, when you go out to the right. And she just kind of sat there like, well, that's not really cool. And she instantly realized where she was in politics. Like, she had to go left or right. And literally she had to go left or right. And so she kind of speaks about that. And so when Justin Amash left, like, she came out in support of him. Like, this is like, I am proud of Justin Amash for sticking up to his guns, which he's done historically his entire political career. He's never just followed party politics, which has gotten him into a lot of trouble with his own party. But for Tulsi to come out and support him that way, like, that garners a lot of respect for me too, for her, even though her economic policies are whack. She's got a lot of good things to say otherwise. And she kind of is her own person. So as we move forward and someone like Amash can prove that an independent can be elected in a very Republican district as his, and then go into Congress and represent himself with his party ideals, we can start to see more of that.
We'll see.
We will see. I wanted to have a correction. Lance Lehman was the Libertarian who is the city council, Rapid City Council Ward 4 seat.
Okay.
That's what he was elected for. So he's on the city council as a Libertarian.
Boom.
Not the Lance whatever guy, Lance Russell in District 30.
Sure. Wins.
So that's the correction I need to make. We were talking about Lance Lehman.
Well, to sum this up and wrap it up, R.I.P. Ross.
Yeah.
He kind of paved the way for the third party, and I think he did a lot in his time and was a unique character. And unfortunately, at the time, he didn't make much of waves. I think he did, but he didn't in the same way. But I think even now in 2019, we're looking back 10, 15 years and saying, okay, this can be done. I think he kind of started the rip in the hopeful overall bigger tear of us kind of realizing that this duopoly is not good for American probably in general. And yeah, I mean, just be educated
and be an individual too. Don't align with the party politics and succumb to the fact it's like, well, my party wants me to vote this way, so I will, even though it's not what I believe or what I subscribe to.
Yeah. That's another, we could go on forever.
We could. And that, yeah.
What about, how do you make sure that voters are educated? Not in general, but just on who they're voting for.
Individual responsibility.
But that's a cultural change. I mean,
it is.
You can't legislate that, and I know you're against legislating stupid things, and I am
legislating almost everything. Yeah. But yeah.
So yeah, it's a culture thing, and I think though that we're moving that way. Once the old guard gets out, and I'm not talking even just the current elected old guard, the old guard of old current staunch Republicans and crazy Democrats.
The problem I see with more awareness goes back to the media. The media skews everything, and people aren't willing to take a look outside of the media that they currently watch, and they don't ask questions. Yep. Like you started this podcast, like, why did we get here? Like what happened in the past that caused us to get here? Nobody ever asks that question. They look, they don't open history books. And if they do, they look at the ones that were handed to them by the public education system, and they don't ever ask real questions about what else happened, who else was involved. People tout Abraham Lincoln as being this miracle man, and George Washington being the founder and framework, but those guys had major flaws, and they're not ever talked about. And if you challenge that idea publicly, you get ostracized.
You really do.
And we need more people to just challenge the status quo and ask hard questions and just start saying like, well, what if we didn't do that?
I think we're there. We're not there. We're moving there. I mean, even whether you agree or not, the whole Me Too stuff. Yeah. It's people questioning things. It's people bringing up things. The whole, we're in more of a culture where that's more accepted.
Right.
Whether you agree with whatever was brought up or not. But 50 years ago, that's why we're at where we're at, is because nobody would say anything.
Right.
Nobody questioned anything. He's like, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Until you got one person that stands up and says something, like Martin Luther King. He's the only, obviously there's a lot of people, but he aligned the faction of people to start asking like, well, what if we didn't do it this way? Like, what if we did have real equality?
Thank you for listening to this episode of America, Beer, Baseball, Tyranny. Please subscribe to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, look us up on YouTube and subscribe to us there. Like our Facebook page, because that is where most of our communication takes place. You can support the podcast by virtually buying us a beer or two, or purchasing our merch. All of the info for that is available on our website, beerbaseballtyranny.com. Thank you again for listening.